Advantage was Russia, huge javelins to Ukraine. This man says 3 states by order proves war military to Ukraine for 150 missiles worth approximately 39.2 million. The state would include China, Japan, committed the launch. So they still set for the 250 million. There are no offset agreements. And future sales could include the Meads and Patriot missile systems that straight over the 18. Using expanding arms, Ukraine can produce the military complexes each of the concept of looking at Meads. And increasing use involvement makes Russia more willing to sustain casualties and invest resources in the conflict. And increasing arms sales risk nuclear war that's 15. These are not in the conflict. The Russian increases involvement in the conflict. Used to do this, so the communication use for quite a little army. Ukraine could lead to do the way the delivery of arms could protect the send arms. Ukraine protecting at the Russian Russian population. They got more small to casualties, so could Russia lead the armies fighting to defend the country. Ukraine will destroy the west supplies weapons to give the US was representative leading to further escalation to track Russia. Other parts of the alliance itself rather than arming Ukraine responsible. And arming Ukraine can't help but win the war. Only risks intensifying the conflict, and it makes negotiating a solution to the war impossible. It's Graham 17. Arming Ukraine will rocket only to Moscow. Not the conflict. Ukraine remains a high priority for Moscow. Which than this for those Moscow intensive push for their military ability to launch offensive against separatist Moscow's no attention advantage. Needs to cost for developing Russian army Ukraine only as it attention to the region. And previous arms sales have been more symbolic than effective, but continuing to arm Ukraine ensures the conflict spiral that will the Ukrainian risk taking its tit-for-tat retaliation and conflict inevitable. Sure, Dasky 18. Javelin weapon service symbolic gesture is vital for policy makers to consider decision about the most appropriate policy for going into further sales needs to love percentage change Ukraine are probably the response of the Russians rather than the stake in this conflict. The US committed with more firepower. Russians have the advantage of geography, potential geographic response receiving lethal launch to build Ukraine needs to be watching us also producing a escalation scenario because the US and the conflicts javelins to make their way to the issue with Ukrainian militia or Russian backstabbing to Ukraine arms control of countless weapons is a need for lethal arms to Ukraine European allies to the police the concept of lethal arms package to develop on the battlefield and increase hostilities to involve the protect proxy war worse. And it also ensures foreign policy incoherence. It confuses Russia about our intentions to make a miscalculation and war drastically more likely than Tier 17. We lethal weapons and more become Trump's specific consultation about the national security and pursuit of policy for the aggression containment conversations Russia arrival of second in American democracy is contrary to both sides and sentiments leading to war. The divergence between both sides becoming more extreme to foreign policies so towards Russia is inherently destabilizing. And arms sales risk nuclear miscalculation between the US and Russia ensures extinction, but they can't deter Russia and Ukraine, create a credibility trap, and embolden Ukrainian risk-taking despite broader Russian expansion being impossible. That's Chrome Halls 10-9. Conventionalism, which holds this aid is crucial to Ukraine's national security, especially the military priority when it comes to the cost of the Russia today does not pose the same threat. Ukraine is far more geographically managed. Ukraine is far more important than Moscow. Russia is especially dominant military. Aid was prolonging Russia to deter fight reaction, NATO expansion, near existential military, to avoid increasing the chance of war with Russia, hurting our own credibility. We recommend as well. Change the stalemate, risk the dangerous situation between Moscow, between Washington and Moscow against military is a high risk, high cost range to backfire. And only US-Russia war causes extinction. That's Far Core 17. Nuclear weapons after Russia were sent with gas observers causing global cooling. Also, loss of agriculture, nuclear weapons exchange for that time. Weapons exchange drop in global temperature, possible level of free threat of extinction weapons between US and Russia, risk of exchange greater from a conflict between the US and Russia. And once a minor conflict starts, it escalates. Neither side has de-escalation measures in place, and both leaders are conflict pro. That's 17. Putin's paper tactic to push it to escalate to the point where the adversary softly Putin Russia crisis manages to get operated and take shot next to advice and fuel industry capable of controlling nuclear weapons and all people to burn overreaction process no longer. As for most issues to remain off of the social media age right time, the unwitting says United Russian response becomes harder to withstand. And deterrence fails. Russia motivated by fear, not ambition. That's Wall 15. Those who favor arming are applying deterrence model remedies and model states and aggressive because the surgery to expand your deterrence supplies by contrast spiral model plus with policy meant to be for security threats to make the situation worse with proper responses to these main delay concerns or some fish right probably Nazi Germany Chinese is trying to bring to whatever power still possesses. And the only explanation for Russia's actions is its defensive realism. They aren't seeking domination but responding rationally to use efforts to offset the balance of power. That's Golovic 17. Russian responsibility for the balance of power, putting Western intelligence of the outskirts of Yankovic and the defense realism for the amount of power that several efforts to bring the exchange of the upbringing for speed of the Western countries to the EU are two major factors that must be neglected between the rescue system national system making to acts of Russian intervention or Ukraine. Certain radical steps to balance of power Russia cannot be considered an aspiring nation, but Russia not prosperous country. The attack is old-fashioned and also economy is also potentially weak. As within the Ukrainian crisis, realism also explanatory power in this respect, Russia was not to be able to touch by great power politics. And arms sales will intensify and escalate the status quo. Reinstating the bar on arms sales to Ukraine is the best way to avoid further entangling the use of the conflicts. Carbon 18. Military policy towards Ukraine. The US Washington approved two important arms sales from all arms javelin missiles from the Southeast Asia to the military system. Congress will choice for the military support for the military to give all the weapons as it sales to Ukraine's Air Force and Navy as well as the Army to build a million symbolic support for the Ukrainian Navy and Air Force far more significant than the nation's strict intention of Moscow to use the president his budget needs to destroy the American Obama administration for food deliveries arms sales to Kiev. Thus the plan. The United States federal government should substantially reduce direct commercial sales and foreign military sales from the United States to Ukraine, continuing to US relations. Lethal arms pressure Russia to lash out. Official documents prove NATO encircled that shut up SB 18. Swiftly weapons infuriates Russia to reduce the public government Ukraine. US was actively plotting a coup against the elected president of Ukraine. Russia to the foreign ministers of Washington to see the capable limits the conflict. Whatever the Russian response is feeling the point used to need to break up office. The NATO next man wanted to push the pressure complaints about being less about NATO extension. Documents prove to cover Russia's assertion. NATO including the Ukraine interior the judgment of Russia and United States only take out of Russian influence puts Russia to use as proving Russia to take for the Russians responsible for getting aggressive responsible for Russia to become. And the US backing of Ukraine with arms incentivizes Russia to transfer tag and pursue a closer relationship with China. It's banned out 15. The US began providing weapons to Kiev. Russia posted no international hegemonic global competition. Moscow's policy in Ukraine is Ukraine not the US treating Russia as an enemy. Russia is what the Ukraine can provide defense arms to research real technology with China pursue a close relationship with China evolved into serious American access to much harm from Sultan. Western interference in Russian and Chinese vital interests causes alignment between the two, and that's from 19. Two nations not formalized to always and foreign policy of two government decision Western interference trying to push China controls of the society China spy Russia's legislation for Russia's officials and region for China's censorship. And US foreign policy pushes Russia and China to military lines, at least to take over the SES, Taiwan, and the Baltic Simon 5-3. Moscow invasion can increase the military cooperation to the greatest threat of military access and become the Washington foreign policy with Russia and China goes to become the they share the central issues that the two D West could enjoy missions position inside the China Taiwan and South China see the military cooperation covering about military situation in East Asia Russia. Support could provide China with being flexible position in Russia and China held the enable access to the Baltic Sea and is setting the closeness between the arms of China and Russia and China have already got farther invested in the relationship. And South China Sea and Taiwan conflict go nuclear. Russian support is key to China 18. China cannot challenge American supremacy conflict quickly section nuclear war. China is enable South Korea to destroy the Chinese use of force to respond will use force to take possession. Beijing is relation challenging the US Navy and Air Force Russia is willing to demonstrate the global ascendancy to deter American military support over Taiwan. American let us be workers with the Russian but when the conflict location stage with the respect to island seizure and in South China Sea Moscow to take advantage of the turmoil nation to further expand its territory in Europe and it looks at the nuclear age and Russia will also retaliate to increase US sales by escalating conflict in the Balkans, Afghanistan, or Syria. That's Bowen 18. US is also leverage push Ukraine to veto position against fighting the corruption but Russia's makeable to create a mechanism to influence Ukraine internally. Regular push Russia is using proxy leverage as well in Syria but not Balkans or Afghanistan are all available options of Russia the escalation not confined to Ukraine and US Russia accidents in Syria escalates to full-scale nuclear war. 16. These Russia businesses no longer contact with the US Balkans and in Syria could rapidly escalate to full-scale conflict in front of the accidental nuclear exchange business like trickle research the United States and Baltic invasion goes nuclear. That's 18. Russian link over the Baltic Russian minorities power to control the Putin to the domestic audience of Russia will not the same way Russian forces occupy the region that days of Putin continues for making the conflict would have to target Russian installations. Moscow is going to use of stopping NATO and NATO's nuclear contributions to the misperceived the positive associated misrepresent Russia's application of the conventional war result in defeat to as well as only possible threat of nuclear action. Russia trying to eradicate the levels that are facing NATO respond with nuclear use and neg authors giving misunderstanding Russia's motive, securitization by the US and our Western allies, all pushing narrative of Russia as the red menace, which creates scenarios where Russia is always perceived as a threat. That's helpful 19. Russia upholds its identity of power, dismantle NATO and EU to prove such as by Western president. NATO shall come to different deciding the Russian nationalism inward looking at the Americans to fundamentally mistrust the Russians and mental the means the world terms. That's the way you see the Union have a strategy. Both parties to be understand the motives. Each other of Russia has been capable of American protect the present election. He did hack before he did violent American on the good and manipulate the world where we're approaching this to come to symbolize the Korean destruction of the post-Cold War international work to do knowledge of Russia by fiction and Trump suspended military April 4th. That's going at 19. Trump is considered about to million in military to Ukraine after the White House split the loss of a slash of 48 billion president has not made a final decision to prove the back the funds of the bipartisan you can from the Senate or the administration circle is regularly Congress by White House as well as agencies who are assuming the black aid to Ukraine the Trump's public difference of Putin and Russia along US allies and because Trump's withholding military to Ukraine and reduction of the F-35 fighter jets to Turkey thumbs all the this is almost 17. Trump withholding F-35 fighters to Turkey but Putin strengthens the Pentagon is considered it's concerned the radar capabilities that this project could be used to divide Russia together intelligence the US faces the economic issue like he's happy lucky market that's 30% of sales from the F-35. Public for conflicts.
Good. So I want to talk about the first advantage. How do we know another state's intentions?
So foreign policy experts have analyzed Russia, and they know that internally Putin and the Russian government do want expansion, but they know that because of economic resources and capacity,
They do want expansion. Putin is expansionist?
Yeah. So we make the argument that while they do act, internally they do want to upset the global order, but they know that they don't have the capabilities to do so. They're never actually going to stay up to the U.S.
So I guess the argument is like even though there's an intent, there's no capability for them to be that aggressive.
Yeah, there's an intent, and they know there's no capability. So even they're not going to attempt.
They know there's no capability. Yeah. Okay. The second advantage. So I don't think really you have any reverse causal evidence that says reducing sales would then break apart the relationship. I'll give you a chance to say what evidence you think says that. Obviously.
Reducing in like what context?
Like reducing sales breaks apart the relationship, the China-Russia relationship.
Yeah, so the Tromanov evidence, yes, it's
the
not
Tromanov. Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't say arms sales, obviously.
Okay, well that's the problem. I'll actually read you a quote from that. The two governments share a hostility and deep suspicion of Western interference. It's about overall U.S. LOI. How do you solve that?
Yeah, so we made the claim that the Shedham SB evidence and the Chibanda evidence make the claim that reducing arms sales sends a perception to Russia that we're no longer going to keep interfering with them. So this interference causes alignment between the two countries, but we remove this interference via arms.
That perception argument does make sense. The problem I have with that is you don't have any evidence that setting that perception would then cause Russia to cut off relats with China, right? Like what evidence do you have to support that reverse causal claim?
Yeah, we don't have it. We don't have it as specific as arms sales, but Western interference is the internal link.
Well, the problem with that is obviously Western interference. While Ukraine is one part of that, there are many constitutive elements. How do you stop things like NATO interference, U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, both of which your evidence says allies are pushing the countries together.
Yeah, so NATO encirclement obviously is not specifically just arms sales, but the U.S. moving arms from Ukraine sends a signal to Russia about our intentions with NATO. So NATO, the Ukrainian crisis is obviously the biggest contention between NATO and Russia right now. So the U.S. removing our support of that obviously shows that we're no longer within the same
I mean, we still have an open door policy to Georgia. What does Russia care about that?
Yeah, so obviously that's a problem with Russia. We'll argue that specifically Ukraine is more prominent because Georgia ended like 10 years ago.
I also have a problem with the Russia backlash argument. So your Bowen evidence says, quote, options are available to Putin. Your Bando evidence says Putin could transfer tech to China. I guess all of them are descriptive of what Putin could do. What ev do you conclusively says? Do you have that says he will? Like all of your evidence is like in reaction, Putin could, he's mad and he could do these things. What ev do you have that says he definitively will?
Oh, like all our like internal links from the first advantage, all to give like how like Putin's like mind would work, like Putin's psychology would work, and how like he would retaliate to U.S. officials and like the perception.
Yeah, like,
I mean, it's conditional and it's descriptive of what could happen. Do you have any descriptive evidence that it is happening?
The evidence says he could because he hasn't. So obviously it's not 100% risk of anything. It's a major possibility that if we do increase Western interference, it causes that.
And what's the brink for that? Because they invaded in 2014, right?
Yeah, they annexed Crimea in 2014.
5 off Russia relations.
First on this topic, how use essential reduction must be greater than 2.7% of total arms sales portella. Into a study that estimated European arms sales in China were not essential, making only 2.7% of military, given the volume of sales remains small. According to experts, estimates violation, only 12 countries account for more than 2.7% of U.S. arms sales. Ukraine is not one of them. We'll insert a submitted chart from SIPRI. The data is below. Next off is T reduce. Reduce refers to sweeping measures that establish qualitative or quantitative limits on weapon exports. It's distinct from the absolute restriction as Pearson. Idea of restriction sales tells disapproval banning or embargoes to specific states or classes of states or types of weapon reduction that includes more sweeping measures such as qualitative or quantitative limits. Resilience vote negative for predictable limits. Their interval the suspect countries or substance weapons which explodes negative program. Next off is the counterplan. The United States and federal government should covertly establish a policy that prohibits attempts to defend Ukraine, the South China Sea, Syria, and Taiwan in the event of increased Russian and Chinese aggression in the preceding areas. That solves the whole lot of friends. U.S. drawing into all those conflicts. The advantages are the solvency of it. Because the next off is the impeachment. The Trump-European relations stable impeachment now, but new fights could change. That said, 926 Trump and also playing defense with his own party until now, but free to pursue the agenda, even if the odds with the Republicans' interest. But now Republicans have a leverage. It's also 20 Republicans could end expressly we need to reserve political capital to shore up absorb within its own party rather than big fights for this. More political great proceedings to consume political and media option. The plan turns the GOP against him. Hard time. 18 and Trump is money over the global weapons making violation for American manufacturers to sell abroad the weapons contractors are catching big leagues first year in office. The last year Bonanza is likely no more than a down payment, even bigger days to come for the MIC. But dangling future depending on funds from swing states and swing districts is what influence voters. Trump has long emphasized job creation, but much of it is an easy popular for a president to give himself the look of stimulating economic activity. Don't expect arms makers, lobbyists, the House and Congress to stop carrying for more weapons spending is making it safer, but translating the less into change in Washington would take as major punchback that has yet to materialize. Sudden reduction of arms to Ukraine uniquely shatters Trump's credibility among the GOP and supercharges the inquiry. This Fox 930 Capitol Hill can figure out why aid to Ukraine had been dispersed. Many retraction letters, public statements, full speeches, and staff outreach. I was advocating we need to stick with Ukraine. McConnell said McConnell is supposed to be administration harder. Graham went on to Pentagon multiple times. Johnson and Portman spoke to the president with this had already been appropriate with bipartisan support. Ukraine administration aiding the United members of both parties to observe Russian aggression. Money held up without clear explanation of briefings. Bothered many. It was unusual for committees not to be in the loop. The Biden's long advocated increasing military capabilities to Ukraine. The Senators or Republicans were concerned about the money having withheld. Collins and Kennedy asked why the funds were held up. Capitol Hill now support for the impeachment inquiry. The threats to removal caused Iran war. Mathis 924 Trump was all Martin scandal, but the two factors given the Ukraine and rise tension with Iran. The quickest way to increase short-term approval to send troops in the battle during impeachment. Clinton launched 2 major attacks. Good news is Trump is far proven reluctant to wage war in Iran. If impeachment is becoming serious threat, I wouldn't put the past to use war as a distraction. Scandals tend to be concerning. The president ability to launch wars. Trump has not shown himself one to be constrained. That caused nuclear. The barrier is very low. Rasabi 19 the administration when you think it's the best interest. You see go decisive victory in the Gulf by using its nuclear arsenal. Trump's cavalier attitude to nuclear weapons and disdain for Iran should know the call about nuclear strike, opening the way for other nuclear states to immediately use behavior, and many non-nuclear states to see their nuclear return war can break out in terms of check on Iran's facilities. The possibility of a costly unconventional conflict increase likely of U.S. escalation nuclear warfare in the Gulf represents a danger to world peace. Next off is the critique settle colonialism and Atlantic change from waste to black and indigenous life killable chattel. Pakistan 17 the colonists comes from a new place not to exploit what is a spatial media state empire. The geospatial collapse of metropolitan colonies into the same time place settle colonialism is happening right now. Settle colonial technologies enable plunder, disappearance, recasting land's property, these separate indigenous people in land. This recast black indigenous people as bodies for biopolitical disposal. The only rights to produce what is produced is whiteness. The land indigenous people as a biopolitical target, fracking, biopiracy, damming rivers, and flooding valleys, and carcasses of pigs, subjugation to death like this to support human life. Extinction scenarios are genocidal. This sustains solar futurism and further perpetuate campaigns of elimination against indigenous population. Mitchell 17 the extinction from emblem of white fears about the end of their world. The complaints to totalize with the nuclear destruction of these imaginary normalize the profound violence of the extinction. The extinction is not real for a wise subject fans negation. The most real melancholy angle and grin existential purpose. Extinction is not a metaphor. Extinction will be used unironically by people who have never been threatened with it or lost their ancestors to it. In our culture, you see a metaphorical abstraction that accuse themselves from decolonization acts to make it appear settlers engaging in decolonization. Well, in fact, we're consolidating the power structures that privileges white discourse and extinction act moves in systematical bullying and perpetuate violence. The training extinction is knowing toward genocide. It entrenches Eurocentric understandings of personhood. The extinction is literal genocide enacted against indigenous. The alternative is to decolonize, talk, and yank to an ethic of incommensurability, unsettled innocence, the contrary aims of reconciliation, which motivates the most innocence. All will need be the consequence of decolonization for the settler, where the questions need not be answered. For decolonization to exist as a framework, decolonization is not accountable. Settlers restore futurity to fully enact the ethic of incommensurability, which means relinquishing settler futurity and banking hope that the settlers may one day be commensurable to native peoples of the Russian advantage. The increase in arms is good. A project resolved in the plan Rex WSJ and Team Putin's by this program we establish a series and see if there's supposed to do aggression. That is what he seems to be doing in Crimea. Americans to make clear that the aggression will be with more arms cells to Ukraine. The criminal strongmen will be watching for signs of weakness. The arms cells deter expansion and project and trick. That's a better way to solve the one season by Shark. 17. The lethal weapons destroy rencursion. The more lethal weapons, the more Moscow will be able to negotiate, providing weapons while not provoking arms states. Moscow is already deployed to the state of the art of government. Ukraine has no plans to attack Russia that provide use to lethal weapons like that have a possible effect in NATO allies despite will reduce Russia's units and strengthening resilience to withstand hyper attacks in the event of a complex escalation. Lethal weapons could further aggressive action. Escalation will be counterbalanced. It's also external. Russian aggression facilitates in the sphere of influence world characterized by global conflict. That's Kagan. 17. The increased ambition of revision powers, Russia and China, and declining the capacity of the U.S. to maintain the present world order will reach brutal anarchy. World order will collapse links with the rapid and violent the regional powers always recalculating these nation countries. They're contemplating TAs nations in Europe moving closer to Russia. We can face a situation where both revision powers are aggressive, posing extreme challenges to global security. Revision SOI is an invitation that will come without the U.S. to balance the regions. The war system will buck under the underchain military combination of regional powers. Our conflict outweighs Ukraine. Spindle 18. As long as Ukraine has regional speed is unlikely to join NATO. Russia is determined to make sure that Ukraine has made the alliance acceptable to the direct conflict with Russia. If we were to accept Ukraine into the bloc, Russia there is an intervention. Ukraine has achieved its goal for preventing formal aggression of Ukraine to NATO. As Russia has achieved its goal, Russia is unlikely to expand the conflict. I don't see any great likelihood of a serious escalation. We may have instances where the Russians and Ukrainians are both unlikely to escalate. No U.S.-Russian war. They'll never risk it. Carpenter 18. The Russia is not missing any powers. The economic system is running capitalism. The political system is very democracy. Russia's conventional conservative power. It would be difficult for Russia to execute anything more than geographically limited expansion agenda. Russia has an economy that has a Canada, has 3/4 of Soviet Union's territory, that a population is turnkey and afflicted with public health problems. Russia is not a credible rival, much less extender that nuclear weapons are not useful for power projection. There's no evidence that Putin or suicidal team way to accumulating wealth. The alliance's advantage or relations. Expanding relations are inevitable. Trade in the South China Sea. Cohen 6 Russia blame after the two warships zero collide in the Pacific by raising concerns about growing cooperation between Moscow and Beijing. Putin claiming relation the best level of history they can do in concert with the knowledge of the U.S. It means helping Chinese out in the Pacific, maintaining strong ties when it comes to trade. The Russian expanding presence in the Pacific amid growing tensions in the disputed SCS include island building, advanced weapon systems, and predatory economic Russian warships have become common. I need more content.
Yeah.
No U.S.-China war, nor accidental escalation. T-17 Allison fails to persuade relative stability and low hostility, make escalation extremely unlikely. The China and the U.S. experience tension, but the country remain far from the bitter rivalry. They view each other as important partners, but behavior military underscores the restrained rivalry. Military combination operates at lower intensity. Military is not posture to fight in major wars, like preparation and constituency of leaders face strong incentives to defuse crises. Lessons drawn from the past, limited applicability and independences, complex with lethality of weaponry. Working on your rallies suggest rivals avoid going to war. Trade, tech, and freedom of navigation guarantee further co-op, and the main motivation is not deterrence versus the U.S. Ismaili 610 G trip to Russia in 2019 came at time attention in multiple fronts. Trade, tech, freedom of navigation, and the SES in Taiwan, China, and Russia are closer to each other than any time in the history of the relationship. Although it's not a determinant factor, the current U.S. posture towards both China and Russia contribute to the rapidly growing partnership. Their EV agrees with this. Cooperation is based on mutual self-interest, and to the extent that it's anti-U.S. is much bigger than the plan. That's 1AC times 5-3. Russia and China have reached agreements for the delivery of Su-35 jets and S-400 missile defenses from Washington. Foreign policy of a major role in bringing Russia and China together, and other analysts emphasize that Russia and China began collaborating because they saw the opportunity to expand their influence. Close relationship between China and Russia certainly tilts the playing field to China's advantage, but China provides Russia with growing political support. The trade talks to dominate cooperative motivation that's Ismaili 17 to avoid alienating Russia and the central energy calculation. China's encourages coordinate China's Belt and Road initiative into the Eurasian Economic Union, and has stated it will not play a security role in the region, and is both inevitable and non-threatening. The co-op is a limitation of the utility of this LCM. 927, it looks like they're cooperating, it looks like they're nice and rosy, but it's not about matching China's interest in the region, because Central Asia right now is a new battleground for influence, not one on the economic side, but it's very much about the great Chinese influence in the military and security. Shows that the relationship between Russia and China is mainly utilitarian. One of their allies shouldn't be overbred, but unless they have different interests in the danger, we over-exaggerate that the strategic alliance is one that has limits and questions.
T-substantial, does Cypriot count for DCS and small arms?
I think it counts for DCS and FMS, yeah.
Cypriot does not account for DCS?
It does account for, Cypriot does account for DCS, that is true. The problem with the baseline arguments you're going to make is that
the baselines make sense when you might be close. Ukraine is so small that it doesn't matter really what baseline you bring up. You're not going to meet 2.7% under any baseline.
How do we know what 2.7% is if there's no baseline?
Well, there is a baseline. It's just that any baseline, any reasonable baseline from the government or from Security Assistance Monitor, from SIPRI, from any other organization who tracks arms sales, any baseline you use, which we obviously should have a baseline, and any one of those you don't meet under.
Alright, so let's say we weren't reading Ukraine, how would we know if we're topical then if we don't know what the
I
baseline
don't
is?
think that's the argument. I think that we have a violation for Ukraine.
That's okay. It's fine.
And also, we'll defend SIPRI as the baseline.
Alright,
It doesn't
so
count for DCS and
Key
SMS.
subsets, what's a qualitative or quantitative limit?
We think a better topic would be, rather than specific weapon systems, specific countries, something that regulates arms sales more broadly,
So what is
like a change to the conventional arms transfer policy, a ceiling on overall exports
Do you
per
have an
year.
example of apps that do that?
What?
Do you have any example of apps that
Yeah, I just said that. Changes in conventional arms transfer that regulate how arms are exported, like changing the AECA,
Just
or a
like that.
ceilings app that regulates how many arms can be exported.
This is
Those
the human rights app topical under your interpretation.
is a
Yeah, I mean, it's a cost-coming condition.
But how is human rights?
It's a qualitative limit, but it's based off of human rights. Countries are different because A. Pearson explicitly says that specific classes of states are restrictions, not reductions.
Aren't human rights violators a class of states?
But they're a qualitative
That's
restriction.
fine. The counterplan? If China attacks a U.S. ship, in the SES will be defended.
No, sorry, I said no.
Oh.
No, we wouldn't.
No, that's what the counterplan is.
Okay, so we just don't respond to anything.
Well, we don't think that China is likely to preemptively attack a U.S. ship if the U.S. doesn't intervene and defend the South China Sea.
So
But even if that happened, the U.S. wouldn't
if the
intervene.
conflict in Ukraine escalates, how do we know Trump?
Well, no, the reason the conflict would escalate is because of. But the reason the conflict would escalate between the U.S. and Russia is because the U.S. might get drawn in because they wanted to defend Ukraine. The counterpart made sure that doesn't happen. So even if Russia escalates operations in Ukraine, the U.S. wouldn't go to
How do we
war.
know that Trump would abide by the counterplan?
Well, because we fiat that the executive branch
so it's
does.
executive. So you fiat Trump.
Well,
Yeah,
we
it's an
fiat
executive
the
memo.
internal executive memo.
Okay. The impeachment decides when Trump suspended javelins, did the GOP turn on him in the impeachment process?
Actually, our Fox evidence
Yeah.
says that when he spent military aid over the summer, Republicans got really confused. They
It's
really
not like
backlash
the
to
Fox
it.
evidence.
But
The Fox evidence says that when
you have to frame this through what the status quo.
Yeah,
What's happening in the status
sure.
quo. This was before the whistleblower complaint or the impeachment inquiry started. Now that the inquiry has started, this would just confirm everyone's suspicions.
Okay, on October 1st, Trump suspended a javelin sale to Ukraine. The GOP did not turn on him. Do you have any evidence that says in the impeachment process the GOP would turn on him?
Yes, this Fox evidence indicates that
No,
they
that
would
wasn't
turn.
during the impeachment process. And
That is during the impeachment. Right? We
that was
would disagree
that
that
was
a major javelin reduction did not happen last week.
Arms sales and mixed foreign policy signals, and it makes a difference in retaliation, inevitable, which escalates to nuclear great power, only the past out by de-escalating rise tension. That's Chris and Nelson here in Rishon group there, the turns to set stuff. But first, it's not unique. There's only a risk of use involvement. 8 minutes, one issue proves that specifically in the context of Ukraine, ourselves can't destroy Russia. I think Russians in Russia actually perceive stating that people geopolitics. Russia is close to Ukraine. That's Chris and Nelson. You see, level interest. Ukraine is not strategically benefit to NATO. However, Russia has invested tons of resources as it precedes Ukraine is a vital interest. D, status quo solves the turns. Article 5 of NATO sanctions and liberal international order all solved. E, aren't effective. Javelins are kept in the western border of Ukraine. They can't be used. Second, there's only risk of a link turn on. A, army Ukraine escalates the conflict. Putin will never abandon Russia and separatists. That's prime evidence. B, escalating the arms army Ukraine drags the US into a conflict with Russia. No chance of deterrence. That's our strategy and have a C turn. Defense of reals and proves that deterrence has the opposite effect and aggravates Russia. And I'll read the card here. Russia's neo-revisions, which proves that they can't implement an expansion agenda. That's Sakwa 19. Revisions say to which challenge the balance of Russia. Russia has to stay within the revision is intended to create new rules or advance alternative models of international system to ensure the application of Russian foreign policy within the original period of focus on modify back to the rising parts of Russia. Last foundation to say that unipolar use of order acting in responsible manner. Of course, status not global. Started from multiple restore the balance. They said no U.S. Russia war, but yes war. First, there's 3 internal links: Ukrainian Boldomir army, Ukrainian Boldomir military human and militia to launch the offensive strike against the Russians. That's Krasnovsky. And second, lethal weapon is literally poking the hornets. That's provoking approval of provokes Russia to retaliate. That's our strategy. Now, it's the third mixed signals. Mixed foreign policy towards Russia increases the risk of miscalculation. Move into relations event. Russian retaliation towards U.S. arms sales makes a shift in alliances in favor of motives to escalate flash within the region. That's MSB and Bowen. That increases the attention to a great power war, the miscalculation and cooperation in the Baltic, Syria, Taiwan, and South China Sea. And signs that's our signs of the Cohen. Independently, they've conceded our Syrian the Syrian Baltics impact. So that should outweigh any of their dissents. And they said onto the line, but they say planning relations and inevitable. Group their relations inevitable. So first extended trauma evidence and relations are not inevitable. They disagree on major issues like the South China Sea and like Russian foreign policy. Second, only a reactionary only aggressive reaction of Russian foreign policy leads to island seizing. That's our internal link evidence of this times evidence. And third, even if it's inevitable, it only matters if it's in the context of aggressive Russian and like Chinese foreign policy. They said no U.S. war, Russia and China war, but that was overview. Obviously, U.S. and Russia and China would work together to lead to war. And they said trade talks dominate, but the Trump and China already signed a deal for trade talks. That was 2 days ago. Get up with your evidence and say they said cooperation is not threatening, but cooperation is threatening. Only the bilateral relations have resentment. It's only threatening if we prove that relations have resentment towards Western countries. Moving to T. First, we meet ourselves in Ukraine are substantial as well. 17, U.S. provides substantial military assistance to Ukraine. Second, security assistance and funding is part of FMS. As the ECNOD, the FMS Foreign Security Authorized by ECA Defense Articles and Services. FMS will be defined by U.S. government funds. And third, current intervention of substantial reduction in arms sales. Most impact availability of the program. DoD 15, consider ECS where FMS substantial reduction of the quantity decrease in viability of the program. For current intervention, everything over congressional notification should be fair game. Allows the 10 mark that as a war. And it's 5, current intervention, substantial reduction is 14 million. That's DCMA to DCMA. That's substantial reduction of 13.9 million reductions decrease in FMS. And 6, we meet new challenges. Sales order 39.2 million, 2 million improved, 7 preferred, A after most apps, whether their interpretation don't have some advocates or advantages. One thinks we should stop advance in DCS in Ukraine. B, precision our interpretation, because from DoD and DCMA they have intended to define. C, their words for negative guidance instead of silly mix and match after they get arbitrary percentage. They said D, absolutely lose the pace, and then teams will reduce 1% less choice education. And E, they still have massive ground functional limits like alliances that fill in a piece for specific regions, politics, conditions, kind of DIB, and some kind of and predictability, historical basins are bad, and 8, reasonability, voting on martial world limiting definition, concept, race, concept, substance. And moving to the T-subset stuff. FMS and DCS are regulated by AECA, that's Forms on R319. Arms expert active provided primarily legal based over FMS and DCS programs. Reductions under AECA can target specific countries. It wouldn't want the AECA is a comprehensive review of option including reduction of arms of countries. Current reduction reduce means to decrease in quantity. The intermediate consideration of plain reading is a basic principle. And reduce means to bring down the quantity. Prefer it to choice after and flex country specific aspect key to topics of education and cross-play reasonability. Moving to the kind of plan. Permutation is both shows like permutation to the capital. We've had a hub cover hotline since 1963. Counterplan can't change the structural uncertainty regarding communication. Can't stop Russia. A is this and this. The counterplan intermittent message contradicts with U.S. policy of sending arms cells into Ukraine, which makes aggression more likely. That's our here. It leads to miscalculation. And second is emboldenment. Provision of lethal weapons emboldens Ukraine to engage in conventional warfare. That was on case and Trump did also counterplan through impulse of miscommunication. That's Trump sure war proofs. That's global times 16. Mostly from both sides, having actually understand but added to feel through what he even split up unprecedented. He's being emotionally, they don't know what to say. He started the principles on what country that manage prices and no songs the are voting makes it unpredictable and impossible answer. There's no literature about it. Or just rejected argument and Kondo was bad. Rejected came first culture. Their model of debate was a focus for 19 to read what dozens of off-case avoid clash by going for one of the two covers leach, which brings ideological extremism to see contradicting positions. Second, education doesn't world force the debaters to prefer death over breath of death which kills instead of in depth research in class. And third, pre-run Kondo multiple ways solve all their offense. Move into the K.
It links to that benefit because
the capital links to the benefit.
It affects impeachment procedures.
It affects impeachment proceedings. Move into the K. For regard to relations that gets away if you have an implementation of the plan against the gay, the NEC has to prove the plan's worse than susceptible. First, competitive equity. Any other interpretation for unprovable moves are offensive voice class terms obeyed to a mom. Second, education. Plan focus key to topic. Specific education teaches nuances state policy, makes more for citizens. Turn to the plan and long on mutual choose the present alternative. Turn to the both. And prefer you to impact structural and the violence of a small potential being resolved by death. One thing nobody says around realism is inevitable. Turns to the ideology. That's the DRGO 14. At the root of the threats to survival human kinds is that absurd moral solutional political arrangement, structural issue rather than human nature, constitutes a conflict, and a state only actors on public guilty for power moral consideration or secondary when states get survival, my part is survival and purge the plan, and the alternative in all other instances would apply link turn the plan's negative state action by reducing ourselves. It takes away the sovereign's power and perm have the USG do the plan and agent of the plan and agent of the alternative do the action that all can't solve material decolonization. That's line 15. The indigenous movement constitutionally reflects certain against other types of actively resisting indigenous knowledge. Do not except outside of knowledge forms of efficiency derives ability to correspond among various knowledge. Political taxes or political refusal is often advanced in indigenous demands and market and demands and perms to the plans and the decolonization. Move into impeachment side. 400 million of military aid thoughts if the GOP were trying to impeach Trump, it should have already happened because military aid to Ukraine was already suspended. That's the legit plan. That's our Cohen-19 evidence. And Trump's shaking ship. Impeachment is nevertheless Ruben 10-8. More than enough evidence of the household of Bolton's case inevitably of impeachment fighting against inevitable charge makes it easier for Senate to break with a further trial. And for Trump. And impeachment is key. Trump policies of isolation makes the global order instability and conflict inevitable. Also prevents the diversion of war. That's Rantanel, Edelman 17. World now seems less stable, more dangerous, less separated global crisis. Peace America responsibility for should get the world be normal key structural shift underway. The Russian use Washington primacy relationship with American competitors in foreign China has expanded regulation of the shift already being seen. The day there was on the geopolitical scene, change of the post-war era, the important season of authoritarian challenge, and return to the alternatives and general political conflict. Trump rise of the Soviets and I have American internationals and not returning to isolation. And we don't have to win the GOP gets on board. Our impacts true regardless of their removal. And GOP isn't loyal to him. That's our price 10-11. Trump, however, is from an institutional Republican, and that's when Little during the old with his actual anyone who was sad to be around 30 years ago. Launch of the fake also realizes there's not a lot for president. And tied about the GOP turning about Trump, that's price 10-11. This conventional wisdom is wrong. It's more likely that any individual ending with commander-in-chief and beating the charges against him and serving out a full term. And first of all, should the bolster that situation now quite different Trump action in Ukraine scandal and implicated constitutional fabric.
Yep.
Yeah.
You read this impeachment key argument. Where do you think this card says that Trump is causing these crises?
Wait.
You read Brand's element piece that was from 2017 saying the world's unstable. Where do you think it says Trump is making these crises worse? It says Trump once in the card and says he's isolationist.
Sure, it says like American responses are ill-informed and astrategic.
But where does that say? Where does that say it's Trump? That's about Trump. That seems to be about like overall U.S. like Obama.
It says the world is like getting less stable, going back and like reshifting.
I understand that, but why does that mean Trump is the cause?
Like, what do you mean? Like it says key structural shift underways the erosion of U.S. and Western primacy.
Okay, yes, but like, can you point me to a line where it says Trump is the cause of that?
Like Trump is the cause?
Because to win impeachment key, you have to win that Trump is causing these bad things to happen. Where does the card say that?
Like the last line I highlighted, I think it's like it should get enough warrants for like how Trump.
It says Trump's rise is not a return to isolationism. That's not what it says. The relations advantage. You said Russia and China have a bunch of disagreements in the SCS, etc. Why is cooperation inevitable in that case?
What do you mean?
Why is cooperation going to happen if they're rational actors? If they disagree in so many things?
Sure. We say that China's revisionist, and they only want to like deter like U.S. like U.S. liberal international order, like led by the U.S.
Okay.
And Russia, like reactionary policy.
Yeah, but if they disagree in so many things, why are they going to cooperate? Why are they going to cooperate?
Like the Trump evidence states that like only Western interference is the key internal link to like making Russia and China cooperate.
That, but the C substantial. DoD 15. What does it mean to impact the viability of a program?
Make arms sales like not happen in the future.
So does that apply to like any arms sales to any country?
What do you mean?
So would an AF that reduced like a single like aircraft program to Argentina be topical?
If you end all the arms sales, like making it impossible for the arms sales to happen in the future.
But is that like a specific country, or could you reduce like a specific weapon to a specific country? Because this card doesn't really say what that means. I'm asking you to extrapolate.
To a specific like consumer.
Okay, but does that yes or no? Would this be topical? The USFG should reduce all aircraft to Brazil.
No, all arms sales. Like
where's your card substantiated that has to be all arms sales?
Like the viability of the program. The program that is like it's talking about is about arms sales.
Sure.
Like
second part of that, you kind of straw person this card. The top says DCS and FMS, but then the part you highlight about substantial reduction is under the part of this report about international cooperative programs, which is like funding programs. Why do you think that should apply to DCS and FMS, especially given that funding isn't even the word that you use in the context of arms sales? The DoD 15, the part you highlighted about what defining substantial is in the context of international cooperative programs, not DCS and FMS. Why do you think that provides a good statement about DCS and FMS?
Like the card talks about like the funding for that program. And
the funding for a different program that's not the resolution.
Even if it's not talking about FMS and DCS, it's about military transfers and governments.
Our interpretation is that topical ask must produce more than 2.7% of total U.S. arms sales in order to be substantial. Any less reduction is only small. Just meet the bar. This foretell element slam blind. Specific contextual evidence is bad. There's an incentive to put in quotes as substantial with the which links to all of our offense. You should prefer contextual evidence in the context of all of our arms sales because it's the only thing that sets a critical limit on the topic. The FMS, there's no impact to this argument. They haven't read that period that SIPR doesn't take into account DCF, any new ONA arguments, but gets new to our arguments. The counter debate. I'll do it here. But for our 6 points limits, their interpretation allows the country that has to be coordinated or incentivized to narrow the arms they reduce in order to minimize clash, results in individual weapon system for individual arms like F-16 Nigeria, offensive weapons to Bahrain, based off HR form conditions, systems and countries being mixed and matched, which exponentially increases the net research burden. Second is ground-only iron chip requires a large enough deviation from the scope that the net can guard links individual weapon apps and their interpreter allows can no link app fill in relation to set because the vast majority of arms target to a country or main like DIB and politics and any allies don't apply to smaller countries like Kazakhstan or Nigeria, which answers a functional limit argument. Their first interpretation about viability, they've shot person this card. This evidence about international cooperative programs that's inapplicable to DCS or FMS. Can 18. What is the difference between ICPs, FMS, and DCS? FMS or DCS are by relationships. ICPs are defensive resolution partnerships. ICPs through international agreements rather than LOIs or contracts. The relegation that govern ICP are going to be separate from FMS and DCS. Their next interpretation is a terrible case list because 75% of notifications are fake news and you can't tell in advance which will be delivered. That's part of 18. Large deals take time to offer F-18 combat aircraft to candidates likely to be canceled. $110 billion in arms that already resulted in form of agreement. Only about 1/4 resulted in weapons delivered. Notifications, the worst metric on limits. The topic Thompson 17 because no future have been violence. It includes everything that can be covered. Notification include everything, but the kitchen's zone of price tag is a podium. They say we meet javelins. That's not above the CIPRI evidence says that Ukraine, even with javelins, are below 2.7%. They say AF ground. This is just wrong. This topic has the potential to be really, really good. Think of a topic which side Saudi and Taiwan are the breadth of AFs. Saudi by itself is AF biased, but is enough breadth and controversy for a year topic. There are constantly new articles being published on that, and that's enough AF ground for a topic in and of itself. But it also allows for creative AFs about Japan, overall NATO presence AFs, and Taiwan AFs. They say precision. We've indicted their precision, and even then, contextual definitions of substantial, even if indefinite, should be used. This is best for courts. That's Savinsky. 02. Courts found that district courts erroneously concluded that Trump substantially made a claim indefinitely. Claim fatally indefinite. The federal court struck the resolution may be debated. Evidence of usual questions on whether the word substantially that's a fixed meaning how the phrase should be understood by person experience in the food. At best, the impact of this is predictability, what's in the 2AC, but you should allow marginal reduction of predictability for limits because the only ability for the negative to engage is for a limited topic, which means it de facto outweighs predictability, and voting on the C interval over time channels that to a better, more predictable topic, and by virtue of it being more limited, people should realize that cutting apps would contribute to an unlimited topic, which means de facto it's more predictable. They say net ground, the net ground and picks arguments contradict. The fact that there are picks means that apps will be incentivized to not mix and match apps, and will because they'll lose a pick, which means there's an incentive for them to stake out the most controversial grounds, i.e. Saudi and Taiwan, which reciprocally has the most negative literature, which is kind of the innovation I talked about earlier. They say functional limits. The problem with this topic is there's no cross-cutting generics, i.e. fill-in doesn't apply to East Asia apps because Russia doesn't want to make China mad. That kind of shows how specific strategies have to be, and functional limits not checking that. They say predictability. This was one line in the 2AC. There's no counter baseline they proposed. Even if hard, we still need a relative baseline. Small business administration, 10 legislative history, substantial numbers. The substantiality of the numbers we can determine on an industry-specific basis. Enter the number. The small business overall under any baseline they don't meet, so it can't be an offensive argument. Reasonability. Rest of the flow proofs are not reasonable. Offense does outweigh ours. Prevents a race to fringes. No broad lectures, topic explosion. These people break less on this topic of apps and don't vote on T. There's no substance credit because T is substance. Learning about the process of arms sales is good. It teaches us legal mechanism. It's not true for this interp because it's the most limiting interp we can find. Counterpoint. The counterpoint solves the whole affinity. Solvency evidence is arbitrary, not based on evidence, so you should use sufficiency framing. The first argument, permutation, do both links because it still requires a public reduction of sales. Permutation due to the counterpoint, 7% of reduction of sales, which is a voter for stable negative links. This is not a hotlines counterpoint, which is why the first solvency doesn't apply. Group the next three solvency deficits. They don't understand this counterpoint. Emboldenment of Ukraine. Tensions may be inevitable. The question is that the counterpoint caps at escalation and stops your shock from being drawn in. So even if Ukraine is emboldened, even if there are tensions, even if Russia occupies Ukraine, there's no scenario for escalation, which is something that Tweety flat drops the ball on. Don't do one argument. The Twitter argument is an all-cost to YAF. It proves tensions and will inevitably escalate. Second is that it doesn't implicate the counterplan because it caps escalation. Even if Trump tweets, he can't evade militarily because it's an executive memorandum that is binding. They didn't make a circumvention argument. They say solvency advocate, lack of solvency advocate is good. Is key to ground on this topic. Key to check marginal apps. Otherwise, there's an incentive to occupy niche literature in which there's no reciprocal neg literature, which always means the neg loses. It's key to check ridiculous internal link chains. Also key to thinking on our feet, which is the best portable skill. Condo, it's good. First is neg flex. Debater, ask it to pick the focus of debate. We need options to compensate for reaction ground innovation. Debaters are risk averse, having a fallback strategy allows breaking new arguments, info processing, multiple options for Tweety efficiency, best answers, focus debate, increases critical thinking, ideological flex, only way to read a can the count in the same round, alternatives, voting committee schisms, logic, proving the count plan is bad, doesn't prove the plan is good, logical ways, can make any portable skill, skews and doubles, being dissent and T exists for the condo, counter trip is 2 condo, there's a diminishing utility of conditionality, which answers are floodgates argument, they say depth of our breath. Any other interpretation to like pre-condo or uncondo means that there's a perverse incentive for two ways to front load their offense in the 2AC, which actually link terms of breadth over depth arguments. Conditionality means that 1ACs construct their offense around the best neg offense, which is a better for depth overall. It doesn't link to the benefit because it's a covert executive memorandum and there's a historical basis for that. It happens all the time and we don't even know about it. Critique. Concede the permutation test combination, concede util, no link terms can be offense. Russia. We're not extending deterrent stuff. We'll explicitly concede their defensive realism arguments. This is problematic for them because remember when I see crosshairs when they say that Russia might have an intent to expand, but they have no capability to do so, and they know it, which means that drives with all of our impact defense argument because Russia knows they can't afford any escalation. First, no Ukraine escalation. We've advanced an unanswered thesis about Ukrainian intervention. Extend the 1AC Spinella evidence that was dropped. Russia only did it to stop Ukraine from joining NATO because they amended their constitution and then Russia invaded. But that means they're actively trying to stop any expansion of the conflict because they've already achieved their goal. Kremlin can't afford a large-scale war. That's Bricks 16. The Kremlin's not be a land's desire or capacity to invade all of Ukraine invasion. Ukraine is not an for the goal occupation war. East Ukraine were a smaller scale rather than traditional engagement. These cases are domestic separatist elements, which the conflicts have been largely defined. This answers the 2AC existential arguments because Russia doesn't perceive it as existential. They did it based off a very limited goal. There's no way invasion occurs. Low Chalk 15 experts have full-scale invasion. Russia can't afford a country weak in economy that makes it an offensive lesser tactic. Russia appears along the order to seize Ukraine. Historically, political aims in Ukraine include disloyalty politically, economically. Russia, the expansion project over Senate. There's no Russia war. First is capabilities. Russia economy is too small and corrupt. The population is shrinking and aging. They only have nukes, which aren't effective for power rejection because they aren't usable. Second is no motive. Putin wants to get rich off crony capitalism, not risk the regime. That's the 1AC evidence. First is the Ukraine argument. The 1AC evidence is that there's also an incentive for Ukraine not to escalate because they know they'd be hurt by Russia and they'd get beaten by them in an instant. That also answers the lethal weaponry arguments. These are reasons tensions might escalate, tensions might occur, but not reasons to escalate. They say miscalc. Miscalc is empirically denied. This doesn't apply to this side because Iran is an irrational actor. Neither psychological escalation. Both sides were not looking for signs to call a halt. These second have agreed to this just suppose the right course. Launching another stand on represents some position of rapidity. There have been since 1945 many known accidents on internal nuclear detonation, nuclear war being triggered by false alarm. Down these incidents, it matters to get near to nuclear launch. Market near to nuclear launch. And empirics disprove a Russia war across 18. There's still too much evidence for respective interaction between US and Russia. Suspect physical combination will take place or on numerous example of restrictions. So both sides do not want to pursue war. They've been respecting out over the globe for your intents and less accusation maneuvers and military conflict drive. The United States has done airstrikes in Syria and the military Russian vessels have been killed. The two sides have clearly collaborated. Market clearly collaborated relations. This advantage is not very good. There's two threshold arguments. First, their impact scenarios are all causes. Every time they say Russia and China co-op is bad, their evidence descriptive actions are being undertaken now. Second is that they don't have reverse causal evidence, which they admitted to in YC crossovers, i.e. they have no solvency evidence to say that reducing arms breaks apart the relationship. Most of their evidence is already ingrained. We've recut out most of their evidence that says the relationship is utility-based, i.e. that they have mutual interest. The one I see Strim evidence and Trofanov evidence says it's based off deceptive suspicion. If it is based off the United States, trade, tech, FON is the Mali evidence that cites public documents and says that they do it because it helps each other. Russia gets Chinese political support and China gets arms from Russia, and China gets a Belt and Road Initiative participation from Russia. To the extent that they've already signed a trade deal, that proves that kind of cooperation is built into the relationship, and there's no risk that it will be broken out. If cooperation, aggressive, there's no evidence to support this bright line argument about aggressive Russian foreign policy, because cooperation is inevitable overall, which their evidence says will lead to aggressive foreign policy. There's no U.S.-China war. They can see it's a limited rivalry because they're competitors, but not Cold War rivalry. Historical examples prove that they work to reduce hostility in time of miscalculation, like 2001 and 2009.
Wouldn't AF that reduces like five F-35s to Taiwan be top on your jurisdiction as long as they meet the threshold of 2.7%?
Yes, and that's a good app. I think that there's a lot of evidence supporting that controversy. Like, so, I would be happy debating that app.
So like there's 98 countries that like the world sells arms, like the U.S. sells arms too. They can just like reduce 5 F-35s every single country.
The problem with that is that's a limits argument for us. Although your interp allows that. Because they can't mix and match. Like there's no solvency advocate that will advocate for that conglomeration of countries. And first, because they'll lose a pace, like you said. Second is that if there is literature that supports that, then most likely there'll be reciprocal neg literature. Like the only thing I could think about would be like a NATO app or an East Asia Presence app that reduces countries across the board, which is a good debate to have because then the neg would get so much ground about overall geopolitical consideration. That would be an amazing foreign policy topic.
Your answer to like no functional, like you said, no functional limits like cross-apply to like different types of affirmatives. If you make like appeasement for specific regions, how does that like not solve?
Well, that's part of the problem, I think, because first, it's already a burden on the negative to have a specific appeasement DA for each region, because some of that doesn't even apply. Like Africa, there's no, right, like you can't read Russia or China appeasement, which kind of shows that. But second is like, it would be much harder. Let's say I just read a generic Russia appeasement DA against you. You would have all these Ukraine-specific cards, I would get crushed in an instant, which kind of shows that we have to do specific research.
Does that mean it's better? It would be a better model debate if like the countries that we sell arms to would just reduce 100% of those arms?
No, because exactly, it would apply to some countries. Like, yeah, there's obviously an impeachment or an aggression DA for this country, but there's not the same thing for a country like Georgia, Bahrain. There's no appeasement DAs for those.
Yes, that's fine. The 2.7%, it's from like, it's like 20 years ago. It's citing an author that like made by China, like Chinese imports. Like, why should we still like air neg?
Well, first, I mean, I'll answer this question, but all the limits outweigh predictability stuff kind of should filter these claims. Second is that, although imperfect, we think it's better than your interpretation, and I think it's a little better than you're giving it credit for because it's talking about a relative baseline. It might be about imports, but it's about how arms sales experts measure declines in arms. And then
the decline in arms, but like arms sales fluctuate annually. Like there's like 50 billion and 60
Yeah.
billion. Like
Well, that's why CIPR uses a 5-year baseline. It accounts for some amount of fluctuation.
sure. On case, I guess like I don't really understand what you're like. On Russia, you said like Russia's a defensive realist, they have no capabilities.
Yeah.
which
So
is-
this applies to both advantages because you have that politics impact and the Syria impact. The impact beyond the first one applies to both. The argument is that, as you said, Russia knows they can't afford a large-scale war. Because their economy, they have an aging population, their currency is being devalued, are like arguments you've made or your evidence makes, which kind of shows that even if the warrants you gave in the 2AC are true, they'll de-escalate inevitably.
Then if we prove that like Russia will only escalate in the context of Ukraine, like the stakes out everything.
Well, the problem with that is we've had really good evidence that, like, historically chart the reason for Russian aggression in Ukraine. The reason was that as soon as we adopted an open door policy and NATO and Ukraine amended their constitution for NATO, Russia invaded.
So. Everyone, yeah, but good, cool.
They can see the turbulent negotiations always around war causes extinction, show diversionary first strike causes retaliation in the part of the region and by other nuclear powers because the northern barrier to first strike in the Middle East has collapsed. Trump's rationality means there are no checks on conflict, which outweighs other great powers that because he hates Iran specifically, he turns to Russia. Advantage first is around war draws in Russia because they're strategic allies because of the same war, but on a broader scale too, bogging down the US in a long war in the Middle East trades off with the robust returns of Russia and China and Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia because it means more resources to be funneled to the Middle East, which is proven by the war on terror. It also turns to relations advantage. One, a desperate Trump will overcome for the plan by attacking Russia, which drives them to China because he would have to shore up his anti-Russian credentials. Second, lashing against Iran spirals across the Middle East, which is a bigger internally drawn than Syria because its tensions are rising there now and Syria is de-escalating. Three, Trump will attack China by escalating tensions over Taiwan and the SDS is shore that which is proven by his hardline policies over especially they dropped the link and just contested the unionists and linking unionists. The act causes a certain impeachment by both confirming the unconstitutionality of his withholding aid to Ukraine and they dropped an independent link to arms reductions overall. There are no new one-air arguments on this. Maintaining in-party PC is critical for Trump to fend off his removal, but signaling a move away from arms sales forces backlash against him because the plan hurts the defense industry and hurts their domestic constituencies. Lobbying money outweighs any other concern. The lobbying money outweighs any other concern. They don't get to answer this. The one area they're line by line. The 400 million argument doesn't thumb. Our Fox evidence prices it in. It says that reduction made GOP senators uncertain, but it happened before the whistleblower report. A reduction now, given the inquiry, just confirms everybody's suspicions that the reduction was for leverage and is uniquely key. The plan clears up confusion and confirms the use of military aid as a negotiating tool. Nichols 921. There's room for a decent member of impeachment. What you face in the entire situation called for Ukraine. If Trump tried to use military aid as leverage, he both held Ukrainian and American security hostage. Trump abused his position. There's no spin, no alternate theory that can get around Trump. Use officer own gain and foreign policy. At risk rejection of javelins are key. Uniquely, the seekers. 925. Blomberg's access to whistleblower complaint allegation deeply disturbing. The Trump has Zelensky to investigate the Biden call campaign days after the Trump for nearly 400 million aid to Ukraine. Zelensky said Ukraine was ready to buy more javelins. Trump responded, "Would you like to do us a favor?" Though the memo is way worse than they anticipated. They just approved new sales. Don't need the absolute complete 180 capacity. 10-1. The State Department approving Congress is only about 39 million. Still have additional javelins and weapons to Ukraine and Ukraine do the divisions anyway. If they win this argument, it doesn't take out the arms sales link because that wasn't because military aid is not the same link to the hard target events in the 1 and C. The inevitability stuff. I'll group the 3 cards. Trump removal will fail now, but only if he can successfully core Republican senators. The nature of the newest evidence means he must concentrate all available resources on maintaining positive relations with the GOP senators, but there's no impeachment now. That's the framing issue is that none of the cards they read are conclusive. They say the GOP may be upset with Trump or may not like it, but not that they will overcome his PC to actually remove him. They're all hyperbolic. It takes 67 senators to remove him, which necessitates a massive shift in the status quo. Like the app is the only one that can do that. Trump's saying PC now, but impeachment removal everything are political games. Only the blanket cost him the advantage shift as Kelly 10-4 for trying to impeach you would need to be PC path to impeachment and Trump's popularity decline Republican representatives abandon Trump. There's a national trade in politics and evidence impeachment requires cross by Republican Biden. Even in the face of evidence, things have to get worse. More Republican leaders conclude their opposition was best served by removing he's safe now because popularity only the affirmation that's broke up. 924. We're not have to a serious impeachment. The final side would be a full vote. If a majority votes yes, they can move to the GOP control stand, which would take 2/3 vote to actually remove Trump. That remains a tall order given the continued popularity of more Republicans. So unless some abomination emerges, Trump is likely to remain positive political relations. Power incredible remove threats now, but it's possible McCarthy 925 as a discard Alice Powell his political capital pays out. The documentation emerged that of Trump asking for foreign leader for dirt. Anyone holding the rights for Republicans to determine that long since inspired by their signs. Trump was not in deeper trouble than he was. The Senate expressed concern, but Trump still has padding. Defection would be required. A close ally showed no signs of budging, but the making Trump's request of carrying him to under the Senate after is the only thing statement on big consequences of Kreiner 10-8. Investigation by avoiding the president's arrest or political capital change of politics from him. They can weaken the president's political position. Bar consequences. Short-term investigation is survival, but the long-term investigation can seriously diminish his capital. They say the turn. You can't go for the turn when you drop the original impact of threat removal causes the Iran war. That's 100% extinction, which means they can't go for it. And there are 3 Fermi issues, means the turn is not a viable option. The 2A are first. Their evidence says a bunch of comments are coming now, but it does not say Trump costed them. Just the closest line that says he's isolation. It's not that he's doing anything bad. No new one-area extrapolation. Second is removal outweighs. It makes him way more rational than he is now, which escalates all those complex brands. Identifies. And third, there's no terminal escalation claim in the brand set, which means there's no the F outweighs Pence is worse. That's Bando. 16 Pence is standard hockey absorb none of Trump's reluctance to intervene militarily. Made it clear that his recent speech, his foreign policy vision was constant comment, not somewhere, but everywhere the will join the fight. Afghanistan, Iraq, Korea, the Indo-Pacific region, North Korea, China, Europe, Russia. This is why the agenda, but not Trump's. The president likes to talk up. He kept troops at home. In some cases, the president vetoed the deployment of neocons for the government South Korea to be adept at playing him. Pence American, the rhetoric shifts. He believes in little president foreign policy. Or the starting new wars, underwriting all comments, and defending the globe. The final argument makes no sense, as I understand it, is that the GOP won't get on board inevitably, which we have. But this is warrantless. We have specific link evidence that says they will. I'll read another link. Public disapproval drives protections. As stockholders in all 927 and other Obama's foreign Congress, we are solid that firewall faltered. If lawmakers find public support crumbling, back on the supervision board is where anything in the former White House lawyers that Trump will get good legal advice. The AF flips that calculus. XM 17 alarm cells are in one big way. The Republicans are fighting for winning the votes of the working class Americans who traditionally voted Dem. They will roughly 1.2 votes for working the defense with roughly 300 million who support the sector indirectly see lowering the cells to ensure the livelihoods and provide for their children. Rather our children.
Prep 630.
Only the U.S. Russia war causes extinction. The only country with enough weapons to cause a nuclear winter. Only the nation with enough allied commitments to drag the entire world to the conflict. That's the far more evidence. There, U.S. Iran war impacts the icing between the 2 countries and don't cause global extinction because there's no reason why Iran has allies who would actually cause a nuclear war. Iran has allies who would cause a nuclear war. Russia would risk their entire. Russia wouldn't risk their self-existence to defend a country they don't have very strong relations with. The impact even to the bottom. All into the here just their concession of Russianism doesn't mean that there is no impact because our scenario for escalation is that Russia based because they feel threatened. The arms to Ukraine are bullying the arms. Now, given specifically how these arms cause Ukraine to lash out first, which is the reason as to why Russia progress since they are defensive realists. That's why reason they'll escalate that way. Their argument about how NATO will stop. Their argument how NATO stops with this is different because the use itself would get involved. When go into Article 5, their piece of evidence about how Kremlin can't afford to go to war was written before. It was written in 2016 before the increased amount of arms sales to Ukraine. And Russia feels inherently more. Threatened now. The specifically likely we're the only ones who are actually reading evidence about it in the context of Ukraine. They're constantly saying that there's no cast between the U.S. and Russia, but it doesn't assume the situation that's actually happening in Ukraine, which we're sending more arms than they are working before the javelin missiles were set. The relations advantage. We can get the advantage. We'll continue to impact the SCS war. T-subs. Extend our counter-interpretation. A substantial reduction must remove the viability of the program. That checks all their limits often because all the reasons that he even the 2 were only about specific weapons. This bar counter-interpret removes it because it means you have to cut off all the arms to a specific country, which means that most of these assets only remove a couple. Only remove like an F-16 or whatever would be checked on this. It also solves their ground arguments because removing the entire F gives you really good links to fill in relations or conditions to counterplay itself because it severs relations. It makes it really hard to defend these things when you're after. They say it doesn't apply to FMS or FMS or DCS, even if it doesn't obviously apply to FMS or DCS. It's about military contracts from the U.S. other countries. Their evidence doesn't apply. It's not even about the U.S. in this way. So it also doesn't specifically apply to FMS or DCS. I'll extend precision here. There's their interpretation is extremely imprecise. Vertel is not actually defining what arms away from the U.S. is about. It's about China's imports from Europe, which means it's not actually talking about. It's not actually talking about the resolution. Also, our evidence is specifically from the Department of Defense, which means that you should divide over there. So Dubinsky evidence flows out because the DoD we should divide what experts say, but the DoD is obviously more qualified than Bertella. We also also predictability because that was actually part of the 2EC standard position. If we have better related to unpredictability, absence will lose on this T violation because no one knows what the Bertella violation is. It's like the 56 page in some random book about it. No one's gonna have specific answers to it, but they don't have a determined link to limits because limits get checked by functional limits. There's filling conditions counterplay. Most of these tiny apps with Russia which are salty, which means they're not actually viable things. They're also extend the PICS argument and the PICS of Saudi Arabia and Taiwan, which are the key apps that he's talking about. Which are the key apps that he's talking about. The teams are always just losing the Bahrain, which means it's not stable for an entire year. It's not stable for an entire year of debate. It's not reasonable, even if our liberty changes slightly, it's not a reason to reject the team. There's still predictable offense to read it. There's still predictable offense to read against us, and there's not a reason if Russia's marginally worse, you should reject us. The counterplan. all extent primitive both those to double blind either links to the net benefit or the permutation shields because their link to the dissent is about their link to the dissent is about how arms deals muddle confusion with the impeachment process. But the counterplan has us not retaliate to Ukraine, which obviously implicate Trump in being impeached because which obviously implicates Trump's being impeached because it makes it look like he's another Twitter bro and he's just switched away from arms deals to not retaliating. Also extend our solvency deficit with Trump will derail this by through Twitter and flip-flopping on statements. They said they to make a circumvention. We don't need to make a circumvention. Right? They can figure out that Trump does the ad, but they can't figure out that what he actually talks about it. He might say that we're not going to do this one day, but he might then tweet that we would defend America the next day. They can't specifically do that, and it means it would not be perceived as credible, which should still cause miscalculation. US war also extend the theory does solvency advocates into voter because it makes you have to do way too much research because we can't predict all these possible countermeasures. If there's countermeasures that he could all the ideas that Aiden has, he can just think of and make into a countermeasure, but if there's not actually a literature base about that, they can't very research about this. Also, it's also logical. We don't know if we work in real life. There's also a good offensive evidence that actually need to be discounted by the impeachment system. Also in the first argument before also in the first argument, 400 million in suspension came before the whistleblower, which means that right now the GP wouldn't flip on that because they'd be risking a lot. They'd be risking a lot by switching on Trump. But before then, they could retaliate because of that. And impeachment's inevitable. They'll get actually said the Congress says the historic churches and Trump and impeachment. Trump changing their modern factions and they're just break up the thing. There's no impeachment. No matter the situation on Congress 25 or I won't read that. All answer the first. The evidence RF outdates this way a lot. RF outdates well. So the 2EC Rubel evidence specifically saying how new evidence was found in the last few days makes it guaranteed that Trump impeached the brokers and the McCarthy and the current evidence that they read in the one are way too old. They're from over a week minutes before the evidence was actually made in the first place. The Nichols 601 or 602.
Iran war ways to strike would happen fast and provokes regional instability, which causes Israel, Pakistan, and India likely to get involved. Trump's irrational, but Russia isn't, which was a reason that our impact presumptively outweighs the continued turns case risk of our day. It means we access the after impact 100%. Ace point is Trump would lash out at Russia. In addition, because you try to divert as much attention as possible, which it directly leads to impact. It's more likely Trump or Russia would escalate to that, as opposed to Ukraine. Second is that Iran conflict would draw on Russia because they have oil interests in the region, which means they get drawn inevitably. Lamblind 400 million argument is a non-starter. The Fox evidence prices that in. It says the original reductions, while it might have been confusing and made them uneasy, was before the whistleblower. But reduction now confirms their sufficiency. There were two pieces of evidence, the one in our ran on this that were dropped, the one in our Nichols evidence, and the one in our Sedgwick's evidence is specific to javelins, etc. Reduction post-whistleblower report uniquely confirms suspicion because the call on Trump to reduce javelins, and that's exactly what the app does, which shows Republicans he was constitutionally bought off. They say risk a lot. They can't go few these overwhelmed, so they're conceding first the arms sale links. The Harting evidence says his brand is built on arms sales and not popularity, the jobs that those support. Second is the constitutionality link, which is Nichols evidence that the report supercharged the ability for him to be perceived as unconstitutional and tied to Ukraine, which the plan confirms, but isn't occurring now. The impeachment and Neville debate. First is that there's a framing issue that the one in our drop. None of our evidence is none of either side's evidence is completely conclusive, but the one in our advance a frame through which you should read the evidence, i.e. that Trump is triangulating and using political capital now, which is why our evidence is more conclusive than theirs. But if our evidence isn't completely conclusive, it's at least predictive that he'll get the votes eventually because he has political capital. That's the one in C7 evidence, which frames how you go through after the round and read all of this evidence, which is a drop 1A argument. Now, the 1A only read one piece of evidence and then extended the Tracy Rubin evidence. Don't let them extend the other Tracy Rubin evidence because that just wasn't in the 1AR. First is that their impeachment level part in the 1AR is only about House impeachment. It's not about removal, which is important because our internal link was credible threat of removal. Obviously, Democrats in the House will impeach him inevitably. That's not our scenario. The Rubin evidence is made up, i.e. that they are saying he assumes new evidence, and the card says evidence to date, but doesn't cite anything new. Our evidence is from 925, and obviously prices that and make them name examples because they're just flat out wrong. There was no new evidence, and there was no new evidence. There's 4 reasons that there's no impeachment now. First is party buy-in. The 1AR Kelly evidence says loyalty will stop senators from abandoning now, but there's a trade-off between loyalty and the actual veracity of the claim, i.e. the plan is enough to tip that because it increases that veracity. Second is popularity in Congress. 1AR Prokop evidence says, quote, he's likely to remain because he's popular and that popularity is increasing and they want their own popularity to be devised from Trump. But it says absent a bombshell that would remain, which the act is that bombshell. Third is that positive political relations is increasing now. Our evidence says it's enough to stop defection. defections, which is what their evidence assumes, but none of it's conclusive. Our evidence says defections in the long run aren't likely because of loyalty, but that loyalties coalesce around a party identity, which the AF corrects. Fourth is PC. The Kreiner evidence says that the scandal is survivable insofar as Trump is triangulating relations now using all of his political capital he can use. The fifth is public relations, which is distinct from Congress popularity because there's a rational incentive for them to support Trump if he's still popular with their own districts. But the plan decreases that popularity by killing jobs and also making the threats look more confirmed. Counterplan. Consider the permit just to test the competition. The solvency advocate was a recent trick argument, not the team. Anything else costs a substantive credit. That was their own reasonability argument. The solvency deficit about Twitter, the Twin C explicitly flagged that this takes out the app. If it's true that the bar for the Russia conflict, as they have lowered on case, is just miscalculation, that's inevitable because they can reduce arms. And as the one air said, tweet the next day that we like Ukraine, which should provoke miscalculation level. Russia. How you frame all these arguments is that there's an overwhelming incentive for Russia to de-escalate. That's their own evidence and that's our own evidence, i.e. their economy is collapsing, it's on the brink of failure, their currency is devalued, and they have an aging population, which means that every single step Putin will try to de-escalate if he can, which should frame all these miscalculation arguments. First is that there's the reason that they invaded Ukraine was to stop them from joining NATO. It wasn't because there was an existential threat. Some of our evidence might be before arms sales were increased, but that only matters insofar as it increased their strength, but didn't actually integrate Ukraine into NATO, which is what Russia cares about. Insofar as that's not happening, they won't escalate because their own goal has been achieved. That's the 2NC Pelosi, that's the 2NC Pelosi evidence, 2NC Frick's evidence, which none of their evidence speaks to, i.e. the overarching goal of that was distinct from escalation, and they know it. The 2NC evidence says that there is also no capacity for overall occupation, which means even if tensions escalate for briefly, there's no capacity for Russia to actually occupy and go in. They say Ukrainian emboldenment, they've dropped that there's an incentive for them not to do that because they know that they get shot they get destroyed by the Russians' incentive because their military is like 1% of Russia's military funding, which is dropped argument the 2NC made, which means both sides have an incentive to de-escalate. The impact defense proper was mishandled. The 2NC Crossing evidence and the 1NC author name, I'm forgetting the piece of, says there have been overwhelming restraint in their relationship over the course of 20 years. This is especially true for Putin and Trump, which have close relationships. A miscalculation should be framed through that because even if tensions escalate briefly, there's an incentive for diplomats to come to the table. The 2NC Quinlan evidence says historically a nuclear threat has never gotten close to occurring because of miscalculation. Yes, it's not specific to Ukraine, but it's even better because it cites every instance of miscalculation and says it never escalates because overall rational incentives will prevent that. And it's especially true in the context of Russia because all the incentives argument prove that Putin will actively attempt to de-escalate the situation.
Okay, anyone not ready? Okay. Coming out of this debate, you should realize the only risk of extinction is from a U.S.-Russia war, and exchange of 4,000 nuclear weapons will wipe out humanity on it, but even if it doesn't, nuclear winter acts as insurance to eradicate everyone from the face of the earth. Look, I don't have to win much for you for removing this debate, but I'll summarize it for lethal arms sales to Ukraine's unique break point to escalate flashpoint to a full-scale nuclear war, nuclear great power war. There's our current government evidence. The internal link isn't about miscalculation. That's a separate internal link, but we'll be going for the Tiffer type retaliation. Our Kazanovsky evidence talks about how U.S. arms sales independently makes Russia perceive U.S. arms sales as like U.S. encroachment and Western interference in Russian foreign policy. Obviously that escalates. It's not even miscalculation because Russia will be fully certain to escalate and lead to a nuclear war with Russia. And look, the first argument they said was Ukraine attacks. Wait, Russia only attacks Ukraine because to stop it from joining NATO. But no, it's not just about joining NATO. It's about Russian ethnic compatriots in the region close to Russia. That's why the Crimea invasion didn't have any like shots fired because everyone in Crimea was like a Russian nationalist. Second, U.S. arms will escalate tensions when Russia just wants to attack it and bring Russians back. Russia just wants to bring back this Russian like ethnic Russian compatriots back to the sphere for influence. Obviously, they would just attack it. Third, even if this is right, our evidence is more predictive of how Russia figures this out. But their argument ensures that this side doesn't turn case because it means that Russia will de-escalate tensions like the U.S.-Iran war and not join it. Obviously, that means that it can't turn its case, and there's only risk of U.S.-Russia war causes extinction because the U.S.-Iran can't escalate. I'll do like more work on that on this side. But their second argument was even if tensions escalate, Russia wouldn't go in. But that's not the internal link. It's about Russia. The internal link is not about Russia going to Ukraine, but Russia attacking the U.S. for aiding Ukraine, not making it harder for Russia to take over land in Ukraine. It's about key geopolitical regions like the Donbass region and Crimea. And they said Putin and Trump miscalculation, but I've already done that work about Trump. Tit-for-tat retaliation is the key internal link to escalation. It's not miscalculation. We're not going for that. That's good enough. I'll go for this side.
there's certainly no like Trump suspended military aid to Ukraine before, and there was only a mild backlash. GOP were just confused because there was no reason. This means two things. First, the plan wouldn't be enough to get him impeached. Since there wasn't even that much of a backlash at the time when he suspended aid. Obviously, the congressional members already perceived the plan. They wouldn't like backlash again. And second, because we're in the impeachment proceedings now, there were political incentives for the GOP to not flip. It wasn't risky to get a little bit pissed at Trump before, but now it would cost them impeachment. The GOP obviously does not want their own party to lose election. They would stop themselves right now. Third, since everyone now knows that the reason for suspending aid, it wouldn't be as confusing as before. The only backlash from before was because it was out of nowhere. Now GOP knows the reasons of why Trump would be removing arms to Ukraine, so the backlash would be much less framed. This through the fact that they have only one piece of evidence that describes how GOP would backlash over the summer, and it just says there was confusion and talks with Trump. The conclusion that they would turn on Trump doesn't make sense when you factor in that confusion is gone and the Republicans wouldn't go on board, and it's inevitable anyways. Frame this through the fact that all the conclusiveness of their evidence was based on information that happened several weeks ago. Our Rubin evidence is really good, and the fact that there's more than enough evidence has come with now determined that he didn't engage in QPQ on Alexander Rubin evidence from the 1AR. First, there's a strong push for impeachment from Congress. Second, voters are all increasing support for impeachment, and congressional members see and perceive the boost in support will make them go in line with Pelosi's initiative to impeach Trump. Third, past impeachment proceedings like the border wall and other controversial arguments have around the support for like Trump impeaching again. The 1AR Mulligan evidence has really good warrants that were answered. And the poll shows that people are against him, and there's no way Congressman would risk election to support him.
Counterplan, they said like the Twitter thing proves the AF can't solve. Obviously, if we end arms sales, that would stop the tit for tat retaliation. We're only going for that U.S. arms sales are the key internal link to war. I'll go back to this. Yes. At the top, they said Iran war outweighs. So obviously, U.S.-Russia war outweighs that. There's a risk of 4,000 nuclear bombs being sent to everywhere in the world. That invokes NATO Article 5. Obviously means that other countries like NATO will be incentivized to attack Russia because the U.S. is already in NATO. Like U.S.-Iran war doesn't get India involved. That's a new 2 in our argument. Obviously, you should take it off the full if you can. Connect the 1AR to the 2AR. Like neg block to the 2AR.
There's no reason why Russia would get involved because if Russia's a defensive realist,
no reason why Russia would get involved there. All their arguments about Russia being defensive and trying to de-escalate tensions around the world proves that Russia wouldn't get involved. There's no risk of a case turn. Anything else?